I'm being so aggressive. I guess you know WildLife International Federation network of NGOs working on biodiversity conservation, and indeed agricultural expansion and agricultural transformation is by far the biggest source of biodiversity loss globally. So on your answer, I think it depends really, we need to look a bit closer, because and you have to start from the scale. If the question is, does globally we have the need to produce more food on the same land, it's a no-brainer, and the answer is yes. Now, be very, very careful about jumping to conclusions from that and zooming down into all the way through regional, national, and subnational, and all the way down to the farm level and saying, well, every hectare everywhere needs to produce more, because you risk getting it badly wrong. And I think there is something that Professor Benedictine did say earlier, which is you have to start with the no-harm approach. So what you don't want is to boost productivity now, when actually we have enough food on the world. People are not starting to pay for our food. This we have to be totally clear. We have big questions about the future. Anything that boosts productivity today by messing up ecosystems and hence, among other things, making the crisis worse in the future by exacerbating climate change and by driving down biodiversity, is not part of the solution, is part of the problem. Now, I want to mention two cautionary tales also on how things get complicated. We've run already a life-size experiment with Europe feeding the world. It was called the CEP. At a certain point, we were running a massive overproduction, producing much more than we eat in Europe. There is no evidence whatsoever that it has saved anyone from going hungry. There is a certain amount of evidence debated that it actually expanded hunger by destroying the livelihood of farmers around the world. So, the simple equation of we grow more food anywhere and immediately we get better food security is just not true. Another cautionary tale is the issue of the land sparing debate is a real one, and certainly in many situations, also globally, the way to avoid deforestation is by getting more production in the land that we have. But if you look at a country like Brazil, that has had a massive green revolution in the last decades in terms of productivity, Brazilian agricultural land has increased productivity amazingly. At the same time, they've also cleared out whole biomes for agricultural expansion. Same thing can be said about Indonesia. So again, it is not automatic, and that's why we need sophisticated policies, and I guess we'll be discussing them later. But let's be very, very careful about taking these global figures, doing the sums, and then translating it across the board and using it as a blanket justification for anything.
Okay, can I bring in all back from the Commission, please? What's the Commission's view? Well, feed well.
Well, let me say right from the beginning that I'm from the Director General for Research, and I look after the activities related to research dealing with agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and aquaculture. So I'm not intending to try and answer the whole Commission here, which I know is the usual problem of when a single Commission representative usually gets targeted for this. But I think it's more important to look at the research issues, and that's why I was invited on the panel. For me, I'd like to support this view that we do have, of course, a lot of people who overeat, but that certainly will be counteracted by the general lack of nutritional status of another substantial portion of the world population. So I think those two things probably cancel each other out more or less. So that's a neutral aspect. In terms of the losses aspect of waste, I think there's a substantial gain that can be had. We heard from Professor Benedictine that both pre-harvest losses are substantial, and there are certainly many issues there which can be tackled through research and, of course, then implementation measures. The post-harvest aspect, in general, the technologies exist, but they're not applied widely. And there's certainly perhaps cases for more low-tech solutions which can be more readily applied. But we haven't mentioned yet the problems of waste further down the food processing chain, and then waste in the home. And I think there's partly price will help to resolve this, but I think there's a lot of education needed to the populations in general that the amount of the luxury waste that is currently happening in most European countries is not really sustainable or acceptable in the long term. There can be some gains as well, but of course, as you said, we all need to do less anyway. And then I'd like to mention another point which also relates to the need for increasing productivity. We've had mention of energy as a whole, but bioenergy has been hinted at, but probably if we're looking at 30 to 40 years, this would be a personal view, not necessarily a view of the Commission, but I think bioenergy possibly will be surpassed by some other form of energy which we also need to be working on. This will then, of course, release some of that land which is currently being used and may be used over the next 20 or 30 years for bioenergy. This will, of course, then be released, could be made available for food production. But what counteracts that is the fact that as oil becomes scarce, we also need plant materials for producing raw materials for industry, and we haven't mentioned that at all here today. That is something which is going to increase, and we have no other possible solution apart from finding raw materials from biomass in the sea. So these things will all encourage or support the need for much greater productivity over the whole spectrum of food production. So from my point of view, there's no other answer to the question, but yes, we have to increase productivity. Of course, things will be attenuated from different parts of the world to others and in different situations, but in general, certainly in the next 20 to 30 years, fairly substantial production increases on the
First of all, as a media, we don't have a set opinion on any of those subjects. We're going to listen and to ask questions. Just like to pick up on the idea of setting up a chief scientific advisor, which I think is a very good idea. Or at least it sounds like a very good idea, because if you imagine how this can be implemented, I can imagine those problems starting very soon. And if we take pesticides or GMOs as an example, the GMOs probably even more so, the science is questioned by all sorts of different parties now, arguing that these are unfair or that the science is actually confusing or anything. But us as media, we are confronted with those criticisms, and there is a case of having a better governance of science. It seems to me that is something that we haven't reached at the moment at the EU level. So maybe this EU science advisor would be a good step towards this. Yes, the government doesn't have the kind of credibility it seems to come up with compelling arguments. But at the same time, we need to recognise that such an authority would need to be respected, and then come the sovereignty issue, which I raised in my group responded to. So I think these are all important questions that we need to ask ourselves: how far are we actually ready to go down this governance of science route? So that it is acceptable for everybody.